The wind howled through the canyon like a voice too tired to scream. Dust lifted off the road in lazy swirls as a tall man on a worn-out horse rode into Ward Hollow. His coat was the color of dry earth. His face looked carved from stone, cracked, sunburned, unreadable. Folks didn't greet men like him, not unless they had reason to. He wasn't the kind that stayed long, and he sure wasn't the kind that smiled. His name was Jedediah Crane, and he came when folks were desperate. He stopped in front of a sagging ranch house with its shutters nailed shut and a rocking chair that didn't rock anymore. A man stood on the porch, older, rough around the edges, boots scuffed, eyes darker than river mud. His name was Silas Ward, and he looked like someone who'd buried more than land. Neither man spoke for a long while. Then Silas pulled something from his coat, a small leather pouch tied with twine, and tossed it at Jed's feet. The pouch hit the dirt with a dull clink. "That's half," Silas said, voice dry as gravel. "Other half when you find him." Jed dismounted, picked up the pouch without opening it. "You got a name?" Silas didn't blink. Said his name was Eli Vaughn. Might have been a lie. Jed nodded once. "Who is he to you?" Silas looked away, jaw tight. When he answered, it was barely a whisper. "He married my daughter. Then she vanished." The words hung heavy in the air, like smoke that wouldn't clear. Jed glanced at the porch steps. A weathered photo sat on the top one, a girl no older than 20, with a wild smile and eyes too bright for this kind of world. "What's her name?" Jed asked, brushing dust off the frame. Silas stared out toward the hills. "Annabeth. She was mine before he took her." The wind picked up again, tugging at Jed's coat and rattling the old gate. Somewhere, a screen door banged against its frame like a warning. The silence between the two men said everything else. Jed slid the picture into his saddlebag and climbed back onto his horse. "I'll find her," he said. Then he turned toward the empty road and rode into the dying sun, where the truth waited twisted, hidden, and not ready to be found. The road stretched ahead like a scar across the land, long, lonely, and sunburnt. Jed rode it in silence, the photo of the girl tucked safe in his saddlebag, her name already heavy in his mind. Annabeth Ward. The name echoed across townsfolk whispers, back in Ward Hollow and beyond. She'd been the kind of girl who made people pause, not for beauty, though she had that too, but for the way she looked folks in the eye, like she saw something worth noticing. She was 22 the last time anyone saw her. Always wore her boots laced too tight. A strand of her honey-brown hair stuck to her lip when she laughed. She helped her father on the ranch mucking stalls, feeding calves, hauling sacks like they didn't weigh a thing. Folks said she read old books by lantern light and once patched up a stray coyote pup after it got caught in barbed wire. She didn't court much, didn't gossip either. But one spring, a stranger rode into town, sharp coat, silver tongue, saddle newer than his smile. He called himself Eli Vaughn. Nobody knew where he came from. He wasn't loud, but he looked people over like he was weighing their worth. The girls at the mercantile whispered about him, but he only had eyes for Annabeth. They said he waited for her outside the church, brought her sugar cubes for her horse, and once built her a wind chime from horseshoes and old keys. Silas didn't like him, said he smiled too fast, stood too still, asked too many questions. But Annabeth, she was young, hopeful, maybe too forgiving, and she believed him. One night, she left a note on her pillow. "Papa, I love him. We'll send word soon. Please don't be angry." That was the last thing Silas ever heard from her. 3 days later, her horse came back alone, reins torn, saddle scratched. They found it wandering near the South Canyon Trail, a place where the wind always blew the wrong way. Silas rode every mile from Ward Hollow to the mountains, calling her name until his voice broke. No body. No sign. Just the wind and silence. Then rumors started. A girl went missing in Clear Fork. 3 towns over vanished after falling for a man with a dark coat and a borrowed name. Jed pressed his boots deeper into the stirrups, jaw clenched. If this Eli Vaughn was real, he had a pattern. And Annabeth wasn't the only one he'd charmed into silence. The trail was growing colder by the hour, but Jed Crane had tracked men through worse. He wasn't just looking for a name. He was looking for the truth. By the time Jed reached Waycross Gulch, the sun had dropped behind the hills, and the sky was painted with smoke-colored clouds. The town wasn't much a string of buildings with sagging roofs, a saloon that leaned too far west, and a rail line that hadn't whistled in years. He tied his horse outside Harlan's tap room, pushed through the swinging doors, and stepped into the kind of silence that settles before a storm. Eyes turned. Men stopped mid-sip. A woman in a red dress paused her piano playing. Jed didn't blink. He walked straight to the bar. "Name's Vaughn," he said low. "Or maybe Red. Ever pass through here?" The barkeep, a bald man with eyes too sharp for comfort, spit in a cup and nodded toward a far table. "Played cards with a fella called Eli last spring. Clean boots, crooked grin, drank milk with his whiskey." Jed's jaw twitched. "He come through alone?" "Nah, had a girl with him. Real quiet. Dressed like she came from church. Wore a blue ribbon in her braid." Jed didn't answer, but his hand tightened on the counter. That ribbon matched the one in his saddlebag, the one he'd carried for years. It belonged to his daughter, Mary. She was 10 when she went missing, taken from a wagon headed to school. They never found her. Not a shoe, not a thread, just wind. He kept that ribbon close, not because he thought he'd see her again, but because it reminded him why he did this kind of work. To stop men like Vaughn. Jed left the saloon and followed the bartender's second lead, an old shack near the grain silo, now used by travelers too cheap for the inn. Inside, nothing but straw, a broken chair, and initials carved into the window frame. EVAW, until forever. He stared at the carving for a long time, then pulled a torn page from his coat. Annabeth's note. Same handwriting. Same curl in the W. Jed lit a match and held it to the wood, letting the flame catch and flicker before snuffing it out with his boot. That mark was false. Same as the man who carved it. Later that night, he lay beside the fire outside town, coat pulled up, eyes open to the stars. The photo of Annabeth rested against his chest. The ribbon stayed beneath it. He didn't pray. He didn't cry. But when he slept, he dreamed of footsteps in the snow and a girl calling for her father over and over into the cold until the voice faded. And when he woke, the fire was low, but his purpose burned brighter than ever. He didn't care what name the man used. He was going to find him. And if Annabeth was alive, he was bringing her home. The road to Ash Hollow was crooked and narrow, lined with dry trees that bent like they were ashamed to be standing. The wind there didn't whistle. It moaned, like it had seen too much. Jed arrived by dusk. The town had no sign, no welcome, no sound, except the soft creak of a church bell that hadn't rung in years. The houses leaned inward, like they were whispering secrets to each other. Most were empty, their windows dark. But one building still had light. Marlowe's boarding house. He tied his horse and knocked twice. The door opened slow. A woman peered out tall, wrapped in a faded shawl, hair the color of smoke. Her hands were large and veiny, but she stood straight and watched Jed like she'd already guessed what he was here for. "You ain't here for a room," she said flatly. No, ma'am. You a bounty hunter? Jed paused. Yes. She opened the door wider. Then come on in. I got something you'll want to hear. Inside, the air smelled of mothballs and wood smoke. The furniture was old but clean. A kettle hissed on the stove. She poured him tea without asking and set it down hard. They were here, she said. Man called himself Eli Vaughn. Girl with him. She didn't speak much. Wouldn't meet my eye. Jed didn't interrupt. She limped on one side, kept her arms crossed tight. I only saw bruises once, just a glimpse near her neck. But enough. She had a blue ribbon in her hair. That detail made Jed sit straighter. How long were they here? 2 nights. Said they were married, but I never saw a ring on her finger. He paid in silver, didn't bargain. Kept a knife under his pillow. Had a black dog tied behind the building. Nasty thing, eyes like coal. Jed looked toward the back door. I heard them fight, the widow added. Her voice low. Late the second night. He shouted. She cried. Then silence. You check on her? I tried, but he answered the door with his shirt off and blood on his lip. Said she'd fallen. I didn't believe it. But I was alone, and he had that look the kind men get when they stop seeing people as people. Jed said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He left in a hurry before dawn. When I cleaned the room, I found a scrap of paper under the floorboard. Thought about throwing it away, but something told me to keep it. She pulled a folded note from a Bible and handed it to Jed. The writing was small and rushed. He is not who he says. If anyone finds this, tell my father I didn't run. I was taken. A.W. Jed stared at the page like it might burn him. Annabeth had been here, and she'd tried to send a message. He looked up. Why didn't you send this sooner? The widow shrugged. Who would have believed an old woman in a dead town? Men like him, they know how to vanish. Jed tucked the note into his coat, stood, and placed 2 silver coins on the table. Not for the tea, he said, for not throwing it away. She nodded once, no smile. As he stepped back onto the porch, the wind picked up again. The sky had turned gray. Somewhere behind the hills, a storm was brewing. He mounted his horse and looked back once at the cracked window upstairs. She had been so close to escaping. So close. He pulled the reins and turned toward the next town and toward the man who wasn't who he claimed to be. By the time Jed reached Crater's Run, the sky had turned color of old bruises, purple, gray, and heavy with unshed rain. Crater's was a rougher town, full of men with quick hands and short memories. The saloons were loud, the law was slow, and the only thing that moved faster than poker chips was bad news. Jed didn't speak much when he arrived. He showed the scrap of paper, Annabeth's note to a quiet clerk who worked behind a desk stacked with old marriage records. Ever seen this girl? He asked. The clerk adjusted his spectacles, squinting. Might have come through. We keep wedding logs. Folks elope here all the time. He flipped through a cracked leather book, yellowed pages, flipping like feathers in wind. Jed leaned over as he pointed to 3 entries, all signed Eli Vaughn, but each with a different woman's name. Same handwriting, same date of birth, same scrawl on the V, but not one mentioned Annabeth Ward. He used aliases, Jed muttered, slipped through the cracks. The clerk nodded. Wouldn't be the first. Used to be a preacher, came through marrying folks without asking questions, paid in whiskey. Real piece of work. Jed copied the addresses listed next to the marriages. None of the brides had stayed long. 2 had left town the week after. The 3rd never showed up to claim her belongings. Later, at the saloon, Jed found a barmaid named Clara, her eyes lined with coal and sorrow. He called himself Jonas Red here, she said over a chipped cup of coffee. Said he was looking to start over. Played cards like a ghost. Smiled at women like he already owned them. You see him with a girl?" Clara nodded slowly. Twice. Quiet, pale. Wore gloves even when it was warm. You could tell something wasn't right. Jed leaned in. "What happened to her?" "She stopped showing up. Last thing I saw was her standing near the church, crying. They left. Just gone." Clara reached under the bar and pulled out a thin gold ring set with a tiny opal. "He gave it to me. Said it was a gift, but I knew it wasn't his to give." Jed turned it over in his hand. On the inside, scratched faint but clear. "To A.W. Love Forever, Eli." The name twisted in his gut. He had promised her forever. But it seemed forever, to him, only lasted until the next girl. Jed pocketed the ring, tipped his hat, and left without another word. Outside, the wind had picked up. Thunder rumbled far off, like boots in the dark. He'd followed this man across 3 counties, and now he had proof. Eli Vaughn wasn't real. Jonas Red wasn't real. But somewhere beneath those names, a real man was hiding. And if Jed was right, he'd left more than broken hearts behind him. Back in Ward Hollow, the nights had turned colder. The wind scraped at the windows, and the front gate groaned like it remembered her voice. Silas Ward sat alone in his daughter's room, hands resting on his knees, hat held tight between them. The room looked the same as the day she left, maybe cleaner. He dusted it every Sunday, kept the books in order. A small wooden horse sat on the shelf, the one she carved at age 12. Its tail had snapped off years ago, but she never let him fix it. Said it was perfect as it was. He stared at her writing desk. A dried flower still lay between the pages of her last journal. He'd never opened it. Couldn't. He wasn't ready to hear her voice on paper. It might break him. He blamed himself, not for the boy, for the silence that came before it. Annabeth had always been strong-willed. She liked to argue, but she always stayed respectful, until the day she met that man. Silas had known something was off the moment Eli Vaughn shook his hand too smooth, too soft, like a preacher who'd never held a shovel. He warned her, told her it wasn't love, just fast talk and fake charm. But she'd looked him square in the eye and said, "You only want me to stay, so you don't end up alone." That cut deeper than she ever knew. They fought the night before she vanished. He'd raised his voice, something he rarely did. She'd cried. Then she packed a small bag, kissed the family dog, and disappeared. The note on her bed hadn't helped. It was too gentle, too final. "I love him. We'll send word soon." But word never came. What did come was silence, and then rumors first from the town, then from the post rider who said he'd seen her horse tied loose near the canyon. The saddle had been twisted, the bridle torn. Something about it felt wrong. She hadn't run. She'd been taken. He could feel it in his bones, the way a man who's worked the land can smell rain long before the clouds roll in. He had tried the sheriff, the preacher, even the Pinkertons. But no one had time for one more girl with stars in her eyes and a note that sounded like goodbye. So Silas waited, and when waiting turned to fear, he did the one thing he never thought he'd do. He hired a stranger with a badge made of silence, Jedediah Crane. And now all he could do was pray that the man rode fast, and the girl, wherever she was, still had a spark of herself left. He stood up slow and walked outside, rifle over his shoulder, eyes scanning the hills. The ranch looked empty, though he worked it every day. He did it out of habit. Now, not hope. He paused at the gate. Hanging from the top rail was a rusted horseshoe tied with blue thread. It hadn't been there yesterday. His chest tightened. Either someone was coming, or someone had already been. Far off in the dark, Something moved behind the tree line. Not animal, not wind. Just enough to make Silas grip his rifle tighter and stare harder. He didn't know it yet, but the past was already on its way back. And it wasn't coming alone. Jed rode at dawn. The land east of Crater's Run turned sharp and wild. The road cracked, then disappeared altogether. He followed an old trapper's map and a whisper from a stable boy who'd heard strange howling near the canyon pass. For hours, there was nothing but silence and stone. Then he saw it. An abandoned mission house, long forgotten, roof half gone, bell tower broken like a snapped neck. Horses grazed nearby, and smoke curled gently from a chimney someone had built from river rocks. Jed dismounted, slow and quiet. He left his rifle tied to the saddle, but kept his hand close to his hip. As he approached the side of the building, he saw movement. A figure in a worn shawl, bent over a water trough. She straightened slowly, turned, and looked him in the eye. Her face was thinner, her hair darker, twisted into a braid with a frayed blue ribbon knotted at the end. Her skin was pale, her lips cracked from wind and sun. But her eyes, they were Annabeth Ward's. For a second, she didn't speak. Then, voice barely more than breath, she said, "You're from Ward Hollow, aren't you?" Jed's chest tightened. He nodded.